Hello, and welcome to the Midnight Deep. I'm Wade Hadley, your host for tonight's journey into the mysteries that lie beneath the waves. Tonight, we're exploring one of history's most enduring enigmas, the lost city of Atlantis. We'll trace this tale from its origins in ancient philosophy through centuries of speculation, examining what Plato actually wrote, how his words have been interpreted across time, and where modern science intersects with ancient legend. We'll venture into the Mediterranean, across the Atlantic, and even into the theories that place this mythical civilization in locations you might never expect. So settle in, get comfortable, and prepare for a voyage through time and tide. Before we begin, if you enjoy these deep dives into ocean mysteries and ancient tales, please consider giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing to the Midnight Deep. I'd also love to know where you're watching from tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. Drop a comment below and let me know. Let's dive in. Our story begins not in the ocean, but in ancient Athens, around 360 BCE. The philosopher Plato was writing his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias, works that would spark a mystery lasting over 2,000 years. In these texts, Plato tells of Atlantis through the voice of his character Critias, who claims the story was passed down through his family from Solon, a respected Athenian statesman and poet who had traveled to Egypt. According to Plato's account, Solon visited the Egyptian city of Sais, where priests shared with him the history of a powerful island nation that existed 9,000 years before their time. These priests described Atlantis as a civilization of remarkable sophistication, built on a series of concentric rings of land and water. The island lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, in the Atlantic Ocean. Hence, scholars believe the name Atlantis derived from Atlas, the titan who held the world upon his shoulders in Greek mythology. The Atlanteans, according to Plato, were descendants of Poseidon, god of the sea. Their capital city was a marvel of ancient engineering. Picture this, a central island approximately 3 miles in diameter, surrounded by alternating rings of water and land, each ring connected by tunnels large enough for ships to pass through. The outermost ring of land was protected by a massive wall plated with brass, while the middle ring's wall gleamed with tin. The innermost wall, surrounding the royal palace and temple of Poseidon, was covered in a metal Plato called orichalcum, which shone with a red light and was said to be second in value only to gold. The temple itself was enormous, over 600 feet long and 300 feet wide, with a height proportional to its length. Inside stood a massive golden statue of Poseidon driving 6 winged horses, surrounded by 100 sea nymphs riding dolphins. The ceiling was decorated with ivory, and the walls were covered with silver and gold. Outside the temple, golden statues of all the former kings and queens of Atlantis stood in commemoration. The Atlantean Empire was wealthy beyond measure. The island produced 2 harvests each year thanks to its fertile soil and favorable climate. Hot and cold springs provided water throughout the city. The Atlanteans built bathhouses, gardens, and exercise grounds. They constructed bridges, dug canals, and created a sophisticated infrastructure that supported a population numbering in the millions. Beyond the capital, the island itself measured approximately 230 miles long and 115 miles wide, protected by mountains to the north and opening to the sea in the south. The Atlanteans held power over not just their island, but also territories across a vast region. According to Plato's description, their empire extended across the Atlantic islands and parts of the continent beyond, reaching into the Mediterranean itself. They ruled over Libya as far as Egypt and Europe as far as Sardinia, which corresponds roughly to the western coast of Italy. For generations, the Atlanteans governed these territories with wisdom and restraint, their rulers maintaining the virtue inherited from their divine ancestor Poseidon. But as Plato tells it, over time the divine portion in the Atlantean bloodline became diluted. The human nature in them began to dominate, and with this shift came corruption. The Atlanteans grew ambitious and aggressive. They assembled a great military force and attempted to conquer all the lands around the Mediterranean. Athens, still young and noble in those ancient days, stood against them. In Plato's account, the Athenians led a coalition of Mediterranean peoples in resistance against Atlantean expansion. The conflict reached its climax when Athens achieved victory over the Atlantean forces. But this military defeat was not the end of Atlantis. According to the Egyptian priests who told this story to Solon, a greater catastrophe followed. Violent earthquakes struck, and in a single day and night of misfortune, the entire island of Atlantis sank beneath the waves. The warrior class of Athens also perished in this cataclysm, swallowed by the same disasters that claimed Atlantis. Plato's account ends somewhat abruptly. The dialogue Critias remains unfinished, breaking off mid-sentence as Zeus, king of the gods, prepares to pronounce judgment on the corrupted Atlanteans. This incomplete ending has added to the mystery, leaving readers across centuries to wonder what Plato intended to convey. Was there more to the story that was lost? Did Plato deliberately leave it unfinished? These questions remain unanswered. What we can say with certainty is that Plato presented Atlantis as a cautionary tale. The story serves his philosophical purposes, illustrating how even the most advanced civilization can fall when virtue gives way to ambition and moral corruption. Many scholars interpret Atlantis as an allegory, a fictional device Plato created to explore themes of ideal governance, the corruption of power, and the consequences of hubris. The Athens of 9,000 years earlier, virtuous and victorious, represents Plato's ideal state, while Atlantis embodies the dangers of moral decline. Yet Plato presents the story as historical fact, repeatedly insisting through his characters that this is a true account. Critias emphasizes that this is not an invented fable but a genuine history. This insistence has fueled debate for millennia. Did Plato believe he was relating actual history passed down through Solon? Did he intend readers to accept it as truth, or was this narrative device itself part of his philosophical method? The ambiguity has proven irresistible to seekers and scholars alike. The ancient world's response to Plato's Atlantis story reveals much about how the tale has been received throughout history. Aristotle, Plato's most famous student, reportedly dismissed Atlantis as fiction, stating that Plato made it appear and then made it disappear. This skeptical view from someone who knew Plato personally carries significant weight. Aristotle understood his teacher's methods and recognized that Plato often used elaborate stories and myths to convey philosophical truths. However, not all ancient thinkers agreed with Aristotle's interpretation. Crantor, a philosopher who studied at Plato's academy in the generation after Aristotle, took a different view. Writing around 260 BCE, Crantor reportedly claimed that Atlantis was historical and that the Egyptian priests still possessed columns inscribed with the history of Atlantis. Unfortunately, Crantor's commentary on Plato's Timaeus has been lost, and we know of his views only through later writers. Whether he actually traveled to Egypt to verify these claims remains unknown. The geographer Strabo, writing in the 1st century BCE, took a middle position. While discussing Plato's Atlantis, he suggested that Plato might have based his account on the destruction of Tartessos, a real city on the southwestern coast of Spain that had been a major trading center before it vanished from history. This approach, seeking real historical events that might have inspired Plato's tale, would become common in later centuries. Pliny the Elder, the Roman natural historian who died in the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE, mentioned Atlantis in his Encyclopedia Natural History. He discussed it alongside other legendary islands and lost lands, treating it as part of the catalog of wonders and mysteries that he compiled. His approach was more encyclopedic than analytical, presenting the story without strong judgment on its veracity. The Neoplatonist philosophers of late antiquity generally viewed Atlantis allegorically. Proclus, writing in the 5th century CE, provided extensive commentary on Plato's Timaeus and treated Atlantis as a cosmic allegory about the relationship between different levels of reality. For these philosophers, whether Atlantis physically existed was less important than what it represented in Plato's philosophical system. The island became a symbol, a way of understanding metaphysical truths through earthly imagery. Jewish and early Christian writers occasionally referenced Atlantis in their attempts to reconcile biblical chronology with ancient history. Some tried to connect Atlantis with the world before Noah's flood, seeing in Plato's sunken civilization an echo of the ancient world destroyed by divine judgment. This interpretation allowed them to accept Atlantis as historical while incorporating it into their own cosmological framework. Through all these ancient interpretations, a pattern emerges. Those who knew Plato's methods tended toward skepticism, viewing Atlantis as allegory or moral fable. Those further removed from Plato's immediate circle were more likely to accept it as history, or at least to entertain the possibility. This pattern would repeat itself through the centuries, with each era projecting its own concerns and beliefs onto Plato's mysterious island. During the European Middle Ages, Plato's works were largely unavailable in Western Europe, though they were preserved and studied in the Islamic world and Byzantium. The Timaeus was one of the few Platonic dialogues known to medieval Western scholars, and it was studied primarily for its creation myth, the cosmology Plato presents at the beginning of the dialogue. The Atlantis story, being relatively brief within the Timaeus and entirely absent from most medieval curricula, received little attention during this period. The situation changed dramatically in the 15th century when Byzantine scholars fleeing the Ottoman conquest brought Greek manuscripts to Italy, sparking renewed interest in classical learning. Marsilio Ficino translated Plato's complete works into Latin in the 1470s, making them widely accessible to European scholars for the first time in centuries. Suddenly, Atlantis was back in the Western imagination. The timing of this rediscovery coincided with another momentous event, European exploration of the Atlantic Ocean. In 1492, Columbus reached the Americas. Suddenly, Plato's claim that there was land beyond the Pillars of Hercules seemed prophetic. Could the Americas be Atlantis? Or perhaps remnants of it? The questions multiplied as explorers returned with tales of sophisticated civilizations in the New World, from the Aztecs to the Incas. Francis Bacon, the English philosopher and statesman, wrote The New Atlantis in 1627, imagining a utopian society called Ben Salem located off the western coast of America. While Bacon's work was clearly fictional, it reflected the contemporary association between Atlantis and the Americas. The title itself suggests that the New World represented a kind of rediscovered Atlantis, a second chance at building an ideal civilization. The Swedish scientist Olaus Rudbeck took a different approach in his massive work Atlant or Mannheim, published between 1679 and 1702. Rudbeck argued that Atlantis was actually Sweden, and that Swedish was the original language of humanity. His work, spanning 4 volumes and thousands of pages, attempted to trace all of European civilization back to a Swedish origin. While his specific claims have been thoroughly debunked, his method of combining linguistic analysis, geographic study, and mythological interpretation established patterns that would be followed by later Atlantis hunters. The Enlightenment brought more skeptical approaches. Voltaire dismissed Atlantis as pure fable, a fantasy no more real than the enchanted castles of chivalric romance. Pierre Bell, in his influential historical and critical dictionary, analyzed the Atlantis story and concluded it was Plato's invention, noting the philosophical purposes it served in his dialogues. These rationalist thinkers saw no reason to believe in sunken civilizations when the story served such obvious didactic functions. Yet even as skepticism grew among intellectuals, Atlantis continued to captivate the popular imagination. The 18th century saw numerous theories placing Atlantis in locations from Palestine to Ceylon. Each theory reflected the geopolitical and cultural concerns of its time. The search for Atlantis had become not just a historical inquiry, but a mirror reflecting contemporary anxieties about civilization, progress, and humanity's relationship with the natural world. The 19th century brought Atlantis into its modern phase, characterized by pseudoscientific theories and ambitious claims disconnected from mainstream scholarship. The key figure in this transformation was Ignatius Donnelly, an American congressman and writer whose 1882 book, Atlantis, The Antediluvian World, became a bestseller and profoundly influenced how popular culture understood Atlantis. Donnelly argued that Atlantis was not only real but the source of all civilization. He proposed that Atlanteans colonized both sides of the Atlantic, explaining similarities between Old World and New World cultures. Egyptian pyramids and Mayan pyramids shared similar forms, Donnelly argued, because both cultures descended from Atlantean colonists who brought pyramid building with them. He pointed to flood myths appearing in cultures worldwide as memories of Atlantis' destruction. Every similarity between geographically distant cultures became, in his framework, evidence of Atlantean origin. His theory required Atlantis to have existed much more recently than Plato indicated, placing its destruction around 11,000 years ago, roughly corresponding to the end of the last ice age. Donnelly proposed that Atlantis was located on a large island or series of islands in the Atlantic Ocean, perhaps on what is now the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. He suggested that volcanic activity or earthquakes could have destroyed this landmass relatively quickly, just as Plato described. Donnelly's work contained numerous errors and misinterpretations. He misunderstood the geology of the ocean floor, believing that the Mid-Atlantic Ridge was a sunken continent rather than an underwater mountain range formed by tectonic activity. He drew false parallels between cultures, seeing connections that modern archaeology and anthropology have disproven. Nevertheless, his book's influence was enormous. It went through numerous editions and inspired countless imitators. Helena Blavatsky, founder of the Theosophical Society, incorporated Atlantis into her elaborate mystical cosmology. In her 1888 work The Secret Doctrine, she described Atlantis as the home of the fourth root race of humanity, beings who preceded modern humans and possessed advanced psychic powers. According to Blavatsky, the Atlanteans had developed incredible technology before their civilization fell into corruption and was destroyed. She claimed to have learned this history from ancient books written on palm leaves, books that no one else ever saw. Blavatsky's Atlantis was explicitly racist, dividing humanity into hierarchical races with some more spiritually evolved than others. Her ideas influenced various occult and mystical movements, and unfortunately, elements of her racial hierarchy were later taken up by Nazi mystics seeking to justify Aryan supremacy. This dark chapter demonstrates how the Atlantis myth could be twisted to serve ideological purposes far removed from Plato's original moral tale. The 20th century brought scientific approaches that definitively ruled out some Atlantis theories while opening intriguing questions about others. Advances in geology, oceanography, and plate tectonics revolutionized our understanding of Earth's history and revealed what was and was not possible regarding lost continents. The theory of plate tectonics, developed primarily in the 1960s, explained how continents move across Earth's surface over millions of years. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which some had proposed as the remains of Atlantis, turned out to be a spreading center where new oceanic crust forms as tectonic plates move apart. Far from being a sunken continent, it is actually growing, pushing the Americas and Europe farther apart by about an inch per year. No large landmass has existed in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean during the time humans have existed on Earth. This geological reality eliminates the possibility of Atlantis as Plato literally described it, a large island beyond the Pillars of Hercules that sank around 9,000 years before his time. The Atlantic Ocean floor has been mapped with sophisticated sonar and other technologies. We know its topography in detail. There are no sunken cities, no submerged continents, nothing that remotely matches Plato's description in the location he specified. However, some researchers have proposed that Plato's story might be based on real events, even if distorted by time and retelling. The most prominent theory in this vein concerns the Minoan civilization on Crete and the nearby island of Thera, now called Santorini. Around 1600 BCE, during the height of Minoan power, a massive volcanic eruption destroyed much of Thera. This eruption, one of the largest in human history, was approximately 4 times as powerful as the Krakatoa eruption of 1883. The Thera eruption generated tsunamis that likely devastated coastal settlements throughout the Aegean Sea. Ash fell across the eastern Mediterranean, and the resulting climate effects may have extended globally. Archaeological evidence shows that Minoan civilization entered a period of decline shortly after this eruption, though the exact relationship between the eruption and the Minoan decline remains debated. Some settlements were definitely destroyed, but whether this catastrophe led to the civilization's end or merely weakened it before other factors finished the job is unclear. Proponents of the Minoan Atlantis theory note several parallels. The Minoans were a sophisticated maritime civilization with impressive architecture, advanced for their time. Thera was partly destroyed and submerged by the eruption. The civilization did decline and eventually disappear, though over a longer period than Plato's single day and night. The theory requires significant modifications to Plato's account, changing the location from beyond Gibraltar to the Aegean Sea, the time frame from 9,000 years earlier to 900 years earlier, and the size from a massive island to a much smaller one. Critics point out that these modifications essentially abandon Plato's description in favor of a completely different event. If we must change the location, the date, and the size to make it fit, is it really the same story? Moreover, the Minoans, while impressive, were well known to classical Greeks. Why would Plato or his sources disguise a relatively recent Greek civilization as an ancient Atlantic empire? The theory raises as many questions as it answers. Beyond the Minoan hypothesis, numerous locations have been proposed as the real Atlantis, each based on some combination of archaeological evidence, geological events, and creative interpretation of Plato's text. We'll explore several of the more substantial candidates and the evidence for and against each. The island of Sardinia, in the Mediterranean west of Italy, has been proposed by Italian journalist Sergio Frau and others. They note that Sardinia has impressive Bronze Age stone structures called nuraghi, evidence of a sophisticated civilization. The island is beyond the Strait of Sicily, which some have argued might have been considered the Pillars of Hercules in ancient times rather than the Strait of Gibraltar. However, this requires reinterpreting basic geography in ways that ancient sources do not support. The southern coast of Spain has attracted attention from researchers led by Richat Structure. Satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar have identified geometric patterns in these marshlands that some interpret as signs of buried structures. The area is near the Strait of Gibraltar and could have been affected by tsunamis. However, excavations have not revealed clear evidence of a large, advanced city dating to the appropriate period. The Black Sea Deluge hypothesis, proposed by geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman in 1997, suggests that around 5600 BCE, the Mediterranean Sea broke through into the Black Sea, which was previously a freshwater lake at a much lower level. This catastrophic flooding would have submerged settlements around the shores of the Black Sea. While this event likely did occur and probably displaced populations, connecting it to Atlantis requires extreme chronological liberties with Plato's account. Some researchers have looked to Morocco and the Atlas Mountains, noting the similarity between Atlas and Atlantis. The Richat Structure, also called the Eye of the Sahara, is a massive circular geological formation in Mauritania that some have proposed as the remains of Atlantis. This structure is approximately 30 miles across with concentric rings, somewhat matching Plato's description. However, it is in the middle of the Sahara Desert, hundreds of miles from any ocean, and geological study shows it formed naturally over millions of years, not through catastrophic submersion thousands of years ago. Indonesia, Cyprus, Troy, Malta, and even Antarctica have all been proposed at various times. Each theory typically focuses on one or two aspects of Plato's description while ignoring other elements that don't fit. A location might have concentric structures or might have been destroyed by natural disaster, but none match all the details Plato provided. This pattern suggests that people are finding what they want to find, selecting evidence that supports their preferred location while dismissing contradictions. The fundamental problem with all these archaeological approaches is that they begin with the assumption that Atlantis was real and then work backward to find evidence. This is the opposite of sound archaeological method, which examines evidence first and then draws conclusions. When you start with your conclusion and search for supporting evidence, you inevitably find something, somewhere, that seems to fit. The human mind excels at pattern recognition, sometimes too well, seeing meaningful patterns where none exist. So where does this leave us, here in the quiet of the night, after our journey through millennia of speculation and inquiry? The scholarly consensus is clear: Atlantis as Plato described it did not exist. The geology is wrong, the location impossible, and the philosophical context in which Plato presented the story suggests allegory rather than history. Yet understanding why Atlantis was invented and why it endures tells us something profound about human nature and our relationship with mystery. Plato lived in a time of political turmoil. Athens had recently been defeated in the Peloponnesian War, its golden age of power and culture drawing to a close. His teacher Socrates had been executed by democratic vote, a trauma that deeply affected Plato's views on governance and virtue. In this context, the story of Atlantis served a purpose. It illustrated how even the most powerful civilization could fall through moral corruption, while simultaneously showing that a smaller, virtuous state like the idealized ancient Athens could triumph over a corrupt empire. The question of whether Plato believed his own story may be unanswerable. Ancient writers often blurred the lines between history and fable in ways modern readers find confusing. Plato's insistence that the story was true might have been part of his rhetorical strategy, lending weight to his philosophical arguments. Or perhaps he genuinely believed Solon had heard this tale in Egypt, even if Plato elaborated on it for his own purposes. We can never know with certainty what occurred in Plato's mind nearly 2,400 years ago. What we can understand is why Atlantis continues to fascinate. The story taps into deep human longings, the desire for a golden age, a time when things were better than they are now. It speaks to our awareness that civilizations do fall, that power does corrupt, that what seems permanent can vanish. Every society fears its own collapse, and Atlantis provides a mythic template for that fear. The search for Atlantis also represents something admirable: human curiosity and our refusal to accept that all mysteries have been solved. In an age when we've mapped the ocean floor and satellites photograph every square mile of Earth's surface, the persistence of Atlantis theories shows our hunger for wonder, for the possibility that something remains unknown. Even if that hunger sometimes leads us into pseudoscience and false patterns, the impulse itself reflects a laudable human trait. Modern technology has not killed the Atlantis myth but transformed it. Today's seekers use satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and computer modeling to pursue their theories. They publish on websites and YouTube rather than in books, but the fundamental pattern persists. Each generation reinvents Atlantis for its own time, projecting contemporary concerns onto Plato's ancient tale. Perhaps the real value of the Atlantis story lies not in whether it was true, but in what it makes us consider. It asks us to contemplate the fragility of civilization, the dangers of hubris, and the importance of virtue in governance. These themes remain relevant whether or not an island ever sank in the Atlantic. The myth endures because these questions endure. Beneath the waves, the ocean keeps its secrets. Real mysteries lie in the depths, shipwrecks and geological wonders yet to be fully explored. The search for Atlantis, while likely futile as a historical inquiry, has sometimes led to genuine discoveries. Underwater archaeology has advanced partly through expeditions seeking legendary cities. Sometimes the journey matters more than the destination. And on that note, we come to the end of tonight's exploration. We've traveled from ancient Athens to the ocean floor, from philosophical dialogues to modern geology, tracing how one story has echoed through human imagination for over 2 millennia. Whether Atlantis ever existed matters less, perhaps, than what it reveals about us and our endless fascination with mysteries that lie just beyond our grasp. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the deep. I'm Wade Hadley, and this has been the Midnight Deep. Until next time, may your dreams be filled with wonder, and may you find peace in the stories that connect us across the ages.